So at this point, the offseason is pretty much wound down. All of the major moves that we're going to see have already happened, and most of the minor ones as well. So as we're about less than a month away from spring training, let's take a look at every team's offseason and break down, did they get better? Did they get worse? Or are they relatively the same kind of team? Now, if you've seen a couple of my videos before, this is a little bit different than I normally do, and that's because a lot of my videos keep getting copyright claimed. So to avoid that, we're just going to start turning this channel into a little bit more of like a podcasty style type videos for this thing. So this is Smarter Baseball, where we deep dive into everything going on throughout Major League Baseball. If you enjoy the content and want to support the channel, like the video, subscribe to the page, turn on notifications so you don't miss out on any content coming up. You can help the channel continue to grow, like a lot of you have been hopping in to join recently. Thank you guys for joining the channel, for supporting. You can also go follow on socials. Links are down in the description. So let's get into every team's offseason, and we're starting this video off here with the NL East. So now first, we're gonna look at every team, but so these videos aren't an entire like hour long plus, because we could get into every tiny little transaction and roster move and everything like that. We're just gonna be looking at what I'm gonna call the significant moves of each team in the offseason. Basically, if you played at least like 30 or 40 games for the team that you're leaving, and you can say they were like relatively on the roster, then we're going to count that as a significant move. And for guys that are coming into their new teams, this is going to be anybody that Fangraphs has projected as being like actually making the 26-man roster. So again, we're not going to get into every single little detail, but at least most of the main ones that you should know. I'll probably miss a few, so go ahead, shout them out in the comments later. Also, once we take a look at every move that the team made, we're gonna give them a, grade, but I don't like doing the A- or this team got an F+, if that's even an actual thing. So we're just gonna make it simple and basically say, did this team get better? Did they get worse? Or are they relatively the same? And I'm not gonna be taking into account, okay, guys gonna be coming back from injuries and, how like young players are gonna progress and old players, maybe taking a step back. Like we could get into all of that speculation stuff. Not even gonna bother within this. Did this team get better or worse or stay the same? Basically just on these offseason moves. So enough of that, let's go ahead, get right to the Atlanta Braves. Gonna be our first team here. And the big, obvious loss for the Braves, you lose shortstop Dansby Swanson. 162 games, a 116 WRC+, but we know he brings even more of that defensively. 6.4 F-WAR puts him well above the 5 needed for what they deem like all-star level. This is a big loss to have, but not your only one. Catcher William Contreras, 97 games with a 138 WRC+, an 860 OPS, already at 2.4 WAR. So in 100 games, he's already above what's deemed like your starter level. Kenley Jansen as well, your closer, 64 innings with a 3.38 ERA, 3.21 FIP. These are pretty big spots in the roster, in the lineup, and your closer that you're gonna have to replace here. As well as you lose Duvall, Grossman, Heredia, all kind of backup outfield spots. Not anything too terrible to lose, but definitely spots you have to fill, as well as a couple guys out of the bullpen and a couple of the prospects that you end up, giving away in these trades to bring in a guy like Sean Murphy. 148 games as a catcher is absolutely nuts to think about, by the way. That's so many games for a catcher to play in. A 122 WRC+, 5.1 F-WAR, again, puts him like right at that like all-star level. This is for sure a talent that you're more than happy to bring in and add on to your roster. They also bring in Hilliard and Luplow. Again, kind of just these backup outfield guys. So replacing some of the guys that, we just mentioned that you lose, as well as you bring in a pretty solid trio of relievers here. The main two being Lukey and Jimenez. Lukey with a 2.67 ERA, 3.03 FIP through 57 1/3 innings, and Joe Jimenez 56 2/3 innings, 3.49 ERA, 2 FIP flat. Those are guys that you're more than happy to bring in to try to fill the spots that you end up losing with not only Jansen, but Darren O'Day, Jake Odorizzi leaving. So overall, you can kind of say you swap out Hilliard, Luplow, Heredia, you bring in I got that totally mixed up. You bring in Hilliard and Luplow, you swap out Duvall, Grossman, Heredia. It's all just retooling that bench. All just kind of swapping out, backup outfield type guys. You get a retool for the bullpen as well. I'd maybe argue it's a slight upgrade. But what this comes down to for the Braves offseason here is the big move is you bring in Sean Murphy, who was third in FWAR, by the way, for catchers last season. I'm not going to discount the talent that this guy has and what he brings to this team, what he brings to the table. But you already had Travis d'Arnaud, who was 6th in FWAR last season, by the way, as well as Contreras, who is giving you very good production, at least offensively, behind the dish there at the catcher position. This didn't really seem like a huge position of need for the Braves. And so you give up what you were getting with Contreras, where you can say about half of the value that Murphy would have given you last season. I'm not saying that Contreras is half the player that Murphy is. We're saying if we're looking roughly at this, WAR, which is not a perfect stat, by the way. It's not the end-all, be-all. I'm not going to say that either. But Contreras gives you 2.4 FWAR in about 100 games. Murphy gives you 5.1 in 150. It's sitting about half of the value, as well as then you lose Dansby Swanson. And that's the big one here. Because even if you are going to make the argument, and I'm not going to get into the argument with this, but if you can say okay, you have a relatively top shortstop in Swanson, and you have a top catcher in Murphy, if you put them about the same talent, value-wise, whatever, I would make the argument you'd rather have the shortstop because you're going to get more playing time out of the shortstop than you are with the catcher, right? It's just the nature of the position. So overall, I gotta say, I think the Braves ended up getting a little bit worse here this offseason. And this is gonna be a pretty loaded division here as we're gonna get into. So let's head out to the Miami Marlins next. First, the guys that they have leaving: Brian Anderson, Lewin Diaz, Luke Williams. These are all relatively just kind of, again, bench pieces. The only guy that got pretty significant playing time was Miguel Rojas, 140 games, but a 73 WRC plus, 1.2 FWAR. He was basically a defensive stand-in for you. Not anything that you're particularly super upset about losing. You also end up having 4 of your relievers leave. Now, none of them are super significant here, but Brigham did give you 24 innings with a 3.38 ERA, 3.65 FIP. And I mean, these are just guys that, they pitched a decent amount of innings for you at least. You're going to have to fill that spot. Now, the fish with arms, they can probably do that no problem. So who did they bring in instead then? You add Gene Segura, 98 games with a 105 WRC plus, 1.7 FWAR. So he's already approaching, and you figure if he plays most of a season, this is a pretty solid everyday type of player for you that you can just kind of plug into the lineup. Not going to kill you, not really going to blow you out of the water at this point though. You also add starting pitcher Johnny Cueto, 24 games last season with a 158 1/3 innings, 3.35 ERA, 3.79 FIP, 2.4 FWAR. So again, just kind of this, he's a pretty solid middle of the rotation guy. You put him in that third or that fourth spot in the rotation, and he's going to keep you well within ball games. He's not probably at this point going to be like blowing you out of the water and really winning you a lot of these like 1-0, 2-1 type of games, but he's going to keep you in ball games. And if anything, it adds depth to an already pretty deep Marlins rotation here. You also bring in JT Chagua, 22 1/3 innings. I'm sure I'm butchering this name, by the way. I'm going to do that a lot in this video, so whatever. But 22 1/3 innings, 2.42 ERA, but a 4.28 FIP. So him along with Enright, who's your Rule 5 pick, these are guys that like maybe they're going to give you something good, but it's kind of a mixed bag here. So you're not quite sure what you're going to get really. Now overall here for the Marlins, you can kind of say you basically take Miguel Rojas out and you sub in Gene Segura. Taking out a defensive stand-in and putting in a solid everyday player, like that's an upgrade. You also add in Johnny Cueto to the middle of this rotation that was already pretty deep, but he just gives you either that added depth, or especially for this Marlins team that's already had a bunch of rumors about trading away some of this young pitching talent that they have, it gives you options. You can trade somebody away, get value back at a position that you need a lot more, and you still have this guy in the middle of the rotation now, and you don't have to worry about just completely losing that value there. So it opens up possibilities here for the Marlins. And a lot of the times you need like 7-8 starting pitchers to get through a season. Cueto's just another guy to add in there for inevitably when somebody gets hurt or underperforms or whatever. So I'd say you take those two upgrades over losing a couple of bench pieces and really just having some like turnover in the bullpen, not really losing anything significant. So overall, man, the Marlins got better. So this takes us now to one of the busiest, if not the busiest teams this offseason, the New York Mets and Big Daddy Steve Cohen spending all of this money because first, we've got a whole lot of guys that were leaving town here. The main one, obviously, Jacob deGrom. He only made 11 starts this year because he's been dealing with injuries over these last 2 seasons, but deGrom is still one of, if not the best pitchers on the planet when he's healthy. So this is a big loss for this team, for sure. You also take out of this rotation Chris Bassett and Taijuan Walker, who are both similar to Cueto there, very like solid middle of the rotation guys. I mean, you're talking 3.42 ERA, 3.66 FIP for Bassett, 3.49 ERA, 3.65 FIP for Walker. Like, these are guys that you're definitely going to have to replace to stay competitive, trying to make the playoffs, especially trying to survive in this division. You also see a couple pieces off the bench leaving. You've got Dom Smith, James McCann, Tyler Naquin, and the one here we're going to talk about is Michael Conforto real quick, who didn't play in 2022, but when he has played throughout his career, he's been a fairly solid player. So he might actually end up being a little bit more of a loss here than these other guys, more than just like a bench piece here. So that's kind of one to keep an eye on. You also lose Trevor May, Rodriguez, Trevor Williams, Seth Lugo, Givens, a handful of these guys out of the bullpen here. I mean, that's 5 relievers that now not all of them had the greatest numbers particularly. Williams gave you 89 2/3 innings with a 3.21 ERA and a 3.88 FIP. That's a whole lot to replace in a bullpen, as well as Lugo giving you 65 innings with a 3.6 ERA and a 3.76 FIP. These are arms that you've got to replace. So who all did they bring in? They brought in the AL Cy Young winner, Justin Verlander, to replace deGrom, pair with Max Scherzer once again as your just 1-2, like 1A1, 1A2 aces at the top of this rotation. 28 games last year, 175 innings, 1.75 ERA, 2.49 FIP with 6.1 FWAR. Like I said, AL Cy Young winner. You also then add in Kodai Senga, Jose Quintana, both of these guys to be in that like middle of the rotation to fill the spot that Bassett and Walker are leaving, and we'll get into comparing the two of them in just a second. You also now bring in Omar Narvaez, 84 games with a 71 WRC plus. I'd say don't entirely let that fool you. This was definitely a down year for him last year. Now, he's not by any means like a top catcher in the league, but this is a pretty solid, like, at least kind of backup platoon player, and we'll get into his role in just a second too. Tommy Pham also gets added here recently, 144 games, 89 WRC plus. He's gonna be that bench backup outfielder for you. And now to replace some of these guys in the bullpen, you bring in David Robertson, a 2.7 ERA, 3.71 FIP. Brooks Raley, 53 and 2/3 innings with a 2.68 ERA, 2.74 FIP. Those are guys you want to bring in to get more value out of this bullpen. You also bring in Hernandez, but dear God, you're hoping for something better than he gave you in 2022. So overall, for the Mets, you say first, you swap out James McCann for Narvaez. Narvaez basically gives you your main everyday catcher until Francisco Alvarez is ready, or more specifically, his service time is probably ready, but whatever. Narvaez is going to hold that spot down for you until Alvarez is ready, and then when he is ready and he comes up, Narvaez is that perfect guy to just platoon with him, to help like load manage, all of that kind of stuff. So you basically bring him in to be this pair with Francisco Alvarez when he's ready. And Narvaez is a pretty good option for that. Now let's get into the two aces here. So you swap out DeGrom, you bring in Verlander. We could get into the argument over which one of them talent-wise and whatever is better. Like that's a whole other thing for a whole other different video. I'm not gonna touch that right now. Where I think this does give you more value though is the fact that DeGrom was only able to make 11 starts last year. So if you get most of a season out of Verlander this last year, even say if he's a tick below where he's normally been, because he is getting pretty far up there in age, just the longevity sake of that, just giving you more over the course of a season, he's going to give you more than DeGrom did last year in those 11 starts. So I would have to say that's also going to be a bit of an upgrade for the Mets this year. Now the interesting one is Bassett and Walker out, and you bring in Senga and Quintana. Senga's the interesting one here, right? He's the wild card coming over from Japan because all accounts, all reports, everything point to the fact that he should be a pretty solid middle of the rotation kind of a pitcher, like at minimum. But until we see him against Major League pitching or Major League hitting, come on, man. Major League hitting, you don't know what you're gonna get out of him. So it could be that middle of the rotation guy. It could be better. It could be worse. That being said, then, Jose Quintana, I'm just on top of it right now, if you can't tell. Quintana had the best numbers, arguably, over Bassett and Walker. So if you're going to bring in Quintana, who was better than the other two, I think this ends up kind of balancing out the risk with Senga. And overall, I think you can kind of call this a wash. That all being said, I think you take upgrading your catcher and upgrading the top of your rotation there over the fact that you lose 5 relievers. You do get 2 really solid guys back, but there's probably some loss there in the bullpen, and you lose some bench pieces. That all of that or whatever, like those are like the last 2 needs on a team. You'll take upgrading your catcher and your ace. The Mets got better this offseason. So now we can go over to the Philadelphia Phillies, World Series runner-up, and by God, are they getting ready to make another run at it here. So they lose Gene Segura, who we already talked about with the Miami Marlins, right? Solid kind of everyday player. Out of the rotation, though, you end up losing Gibson, Syndergaard, and Zach Eflin, who made some starts for you guys last season. None of these guys by any means are, real top of the line starters that you're super worried about leaving. But this is, like we talked about, with the Marlins, this is depth potentially that you're losing here. Gibson didn't give you a whole lot, but Syndergaard in those 10 games that he had with the Phillies, 54 and 2/3 innings with a 4.12 ERA, a 3.66 FIP. Eflin had 75 and 2/3 innings with a 4.04 ERA and a 3.56 FIP. Again, these are at least guys that help round out the back end of a rotation here. You also end up losing Munoz and Vierling, guys kind of off the bench. And for Vierling more, I'll get into if I think he could potentially be a bounce back or a breakthrough type candidate. If you want more info on him, I did a video on potential breakout bounce back guys in 2023. Go check that out to get the full story on him. You also then end up losing, again, a good handful of relievers here. 4 guys in total leaving. The main 2 that we'll kind of talk about here. Robertson gave you 23 and a thirds innings, 2.7 ERA, 3.71 FIP. Brad Hand, 45 innings pitched, a 2.8 ERA, 3.93 FIP. Those are definitely guys more towards the end of a game that you're gonna want to try to replace here. All right, so who do the Phillies bring in to add on to this roster that's trying to get back to the World Series? The main one, you go out and you sign Trey Turner. That'll definitely help. 160 games, 809 OPS, but a 128 WRC plus. And this is only scratching the surface of what Turner brings to the table, right? 6.3 FWAR has him well above that all-star level. That already, right there, you can count as a win. You also add Taijuan Walker, who we talked about with the Mets. Just that very solid middle of the rotation kind of a guy for you, right? Plug him into that 3rd, 4th rotation spot, and you don't have to worry too much about it. Now they go and make this trade with Detroit, where you bring in Cody Clemens. If anything, he's going to be kind of just that bench utility piece for you. But the main one there was Gregory Soto, right? You pair him with Craig Kimbrell and Matt Strahm. All 3 of these guys had ERAs and FIPs below 4. These are 3 very good relievers that you're more than happy to have in your bullpen here. So overall, for the Phillies, I don't feel like I need to get super into this. They definitely ended up getting better, right? You basically trade out Gene Segura for Trey Turner. That's a huge win right there. You swap out some bench pieces. You upgrade the bullpen a little bit, I think. The only maybe debate here is, would you rather take the one solid pitcher in Walker, arguably better than the guys that you had leaving, but then you lose that potential depth there at the end of the rotation? I think for the Phillies, you already had your 3 solid starters at the beginning. Walker's just going to plug in then as your 4th. And if those are your first 4 starters, you don't need a whole lot behind them. So I think in this case, they're probably better off just having Walker than having the other guys. So let's go ahead and get to our last team. We've got the Washington Nationals. And this is a team absolutely in full rebuild mode. They lose a couple starters here, but neither one that you're super worried about. I mean, very back end guys, at most here. One of them, Anibal Sanchez, that I didn't even really know was still in Major League Baseball at this point. You lose a couple guys off of the bench here, or at least what I would classify as bench players. Hernandez gave you 147 games, but a 79 WRC plus, 0.5 FWAR. He was out there because necessity, you needed him, basically. You also have Luke Voit, Nelson Cruz, both of whom had negative FWAR this last season. You're fine with letting them walk out, right? You also lose Steve Cishek out of the bullpen. The bullpen's not a huge worry for this team at this point. None of these guys are anything that you're super worried about having walk out, like in the long term or anything. So they go ahead and they bring in Corey Dickerson, Heimer Candelario, Dom Smith, Stone Garrett, all guys that either are just going to kind of fill a spot on this team, or maybe there's some kind of untapped potential here, but other teams have kind of given up on them at this point. I mean, really, Dom Smith, former first-round pick, had all this upside with the Mets, never really got that much of a chance and never did much with the chances that he got. So he's here. Hopefully they find something there. And Stone Garrett's kind of an interesting one. 27 games, very small sample size, take that as you will, but an 848 OPS, 131 WRC plus. Maybe there's something there. Maybe both of these guys are late bloomers. Like, overall for this team, you basically are just swapping out guys that should probably be on the bench somewhere, and you're giving them a shot to play just to see if there's anything there, so that if there is, maybe you keep them around when your young guys come up, or you trade them away to a contending team and you get something back that's just going to help you with this rebuild. So maybe there's some potential upside with some of these guys, but basically this is what the Nationals just need to do at this point. You're in full rebuild mode. Suck for the sake of sucking, get higher draft picks, get better prospects in here, do whatever you need to just keep the rebuild going. This team stayed relatively the same, and as a Mariners fan who's gone through plenty of years of horrible rebuilding, I feel for you Nationals fans. So this is all the NL East teams, all of their off seasons. How would you guys rate what they did, their moves that they made? Again, just going off of off-season moves, not looking at players progressing, coming back from injury, any of that stuff. Would you say these teams got better, that they got worse? If you're a fan of these teams especially, let me know. I clearly don't watch a ton of the NL East. That's about as far away from the teams as I normally watch. So you're going to know way more about these teams than I do. Go ahead and let me know in the comments below. As always, thank you guys for watching. Thank you for supporting the channel. If you want to show your support, like the video, subscribe to the page, turn on notifications, do all of that stuff that a lot of you guys have been doing recently. Welcome to the channel. Glad to have you. Thank you for supporting. I hope you guys have an awesome day. We're going to go through every division, every team. So we'll be hitting the AL East next. Hope you're looking forward to that. Stay tuned. I'll see you in the next one.